Hey there. We're going to talk today about the Enlightenment and the revolutions. And to get there, we want to speak today about the concept of absolutism and how it really captured Europe and the monarchs that held power. Let's understand the big ideas here, the time period we're talking about. And you need to be using your critical events worksheet that's been provided to you. And we're going to be tracking the explanations of these events and then recognizing the importance. We're talking about really the same time period as what would be considered the late Renaissance. We already have discussed what happens when it comes to ideas and what happens when it comes to religion during the Renaissance and Reformation. And we also have discovered that the Age of Exploration has really changed Europe's relationship with the rest of the world. So we're really seeing how all that's coming to light and how really power is changing. And there's a great transition here. The absolutism theme is, of course, a monarch being unchecked. The monarch is in total control here. We want to first talk about Spain and its empire in that foundation. So here we go. The explanation for Spain leads Europe into empire building has to have discussion about Charles V. Charles V controlled a lot of area and a lot of kingdoms in Europe. Write that down. More specifically, of course, as King of Spain, his colonies, parts of Italy, the Netherlands, and of course we remember Charles V in our discussion about Martin Luther as being the Holy Roman Emperor. So Charles V is going to leave Philip II, his son, to possessions of Spain. So Philip II becomes the King of Spain. He is going to be an absolute monarch. Write that down. With that, he's going to expand Spanish control, taking over what will be Portuguese possessions, even being involved in the defeat of the Ottomans. So this idea of religious superiority is early on in this concept of absolutism. Catholics, Christians in Europe wanting, of course, as we said earlier, in the Age of Exploration, wanting to defeat those other religions and their empires. Philip's reign is going to not end so well. The challenge of Protestant Great Britain or England with the Spanish Armada and that defeat there, and several other setbacks. Despite these setbacks, Spanish wealth is going to be great, and that's going to fuel a patronizing of the arts by the kingdom. So one thing that absolutism we're going to see here is through the growth of wealth, and as an empire, they're going to be a lasting influence when it comes to culture in not only we've talked about in Latin America, but in Europe as well. This materialism through wealth is going to have consequences. The inflation of the economy, as well as the debt that it helped create, is going to cause Spain to go bankrupt and begin to wane in its superiority throughout Europe. So, looking at other absolute monarchs in Europe, we see Louis XIV is really the prime example. Monarchs in this age claim to be empowered by God. This is a power without limits. This is a divine right. Those are all important explanations here. Decline in feudalism, growth of cities, as well as national kingdoms help in centralizing power of kings. All this is going to be true for Louis XIV. Louis XIV, known as the Sun King, will make the statement, "I am the state," meaning I am the representation of France. He is going to decrease the power of nobles. There's your feudalism waning or decreasing in power, and gain wealth through mercantilism. All things that we've talked about before. This is going to lead to great abilities to spend lavishly, make poor decisions on wars. The disastrous wars are really going to leave a poor legacy for later French kings to uphold. So this unchecked power will send him to make these poor decisions and fight these disastrous wars. The rest of Europe is going to band together to check this French power. So by the time he dies in 1715, France is in great debt. Seeing already here that absolute monarchies, the unchecked power is really leading to maybe some poor conditions in later years. Going back a little bit in time to the 30 Years' War, this is responsible for perhaps the modern states of Europe. If we go back to the mid-1500s, the Peace of Augsburg, if you remember the conflicts between Charles V and his Catholic allies against the Lutheran princes of the Holy Roman Empire, this Peace of Augsburg is going to allow choice by German princes as to faith. As time goes on, the situation becomes more complex because it's not just Lutherans versus Catholics. Calvinism has also entered into the discussion. Issues of trust will lead to peasant revolts in the early 1600s. So, write this down. From 1618 to 1648, conflict over religion and power and among ruling families in Europe will be the basis of this 30 Years' War. Fearing Habsburg power more than Protestant power, the French, the Catholic French, will make their decisions of alliance based upon that. So Habsburg victories and defeats will identify the two major phases of this war. And as the war ends, its importance are these things. Spain and Austria become weaker. France will become stronger with the gaining of particularly German territory. German princes become independent of the Holy Roman Emperor. Religious wars have now ended in Europe. So the idea of a Catholic or Protestant Europe has ended. The idea that nations can be independent of religious allies and act accordingly to strategy and power is going to remain. Over time, the German states of Prussia and Austria will benefit from this. Let's move on to Russia. Peter the Great will try to westernize Russia. Earlier czars, particularly Ivan III and Ivan IV, had created great power within the Russian Tsar and had unified the country. There have been some good and perhaps some bad. Ivan the Terrible, of course, identified as that as a result of his secret police used to squash any type of dissension to his power. However, the Romanov dynasty, which started in 1613, will restore any order that had been lost. Peter the Great from that dynasty will rule from 1696 to 1725, attempting to westernize Russia. So using his massive absolute power, he's going to try to bring Russia out of the depths of feudalism. Russia, of course, had still been cut off and had missed out on the Renaissance and the age of exploration as a result of its Mongol rule. The religious disconnect had become a barrier with Western Europe. But his absolute power will lead to these important things. New crops, particularly potatoes, are introduced. Newspapers, the increase in women's status in the society. Western clothes, the fashion of Russia will take a turn. This will be mandatory of those boyars, those nobles of Russia. Education reforms will emphasize subject matters such as science. And of course, the building of St. Petersburg in northern Russia as a gateway to the West. England will have its own revolutions in the 1600s. As this Enlightenment period spurns revolutionary movements throughout Europe, you're going to notice England is kind of absent. That's simply because England is going to have revolutions prior to the wave that sweeps across in the 18th and 19th century. And also during that time period, they're going to be making tremendous money. Their economies are going to be very strong, which is usually a force which revolutions will not overcome. So conflicts in England over religious status had blended with and even replaced by conflict between the monarchs and Parliament. So what had been a Protestant Catholic conflict soon becomes a king versus Parliament conflict. The fight with Parliament by Charles I, who dissolved Parliament in 1629, though needing money later, recalling Parliament. They opposed him. In fact, from 1642 to 1649, King supporters known as Cavaliers fought Parliament supporters known as Roundheads. In 1644, the Roundheads, led by Oliver Cromwell, will start to increase their success. Charles I will be tried and executed in 1649. So with Oliver Cromwell now in charge and without a king, the British would seem to be moving towards democracy, yet Cromwell soon turned that into a dictatorship, structuring the country on a Puritan foundation. They're very tolerant of most religions, not very tolerant of Catholicism. When he dies, this will end and the monarchy will be restored with Charles II. His Catholic brother James will be chosen once it is determined Charles has no heir, yet Catholics not favored by Parliament will be forced to, James II will be forced to abdicate. That means leave the throne. And his Protestant daughter Mary with her husband William will become the monarchs. To do this, they have to agree to the English Bill of Rights. And this is the important part of this English Revolution. This glorious revolution will occur. This is not one where people die. This is a bloodless revolution. And the installing of the English Bill of Rights really empowers the Parliament to be the decision-making force in England rather than that of the monarch. So it becomes what you refer to as a constitutional monarchy.